Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been having the worst day of her 20-year career with the Metropolitan Police. 3 armed robberies in one morning, a missing child case that had kept her awake for 36 hours straight, and now she was racing through London's crowded streets, pursuing a suspect who had just snatched a tourist's purse near Westminster Abbey. The thief, a young man in a dark hoodie, darted between cars and pedestrians with the desperate energy of someone who had nothing left to lose. Sarah followed on foot, her radio crackling with updates from other units trying to cut off his escape routes. Her legs burned as she pushed through the crowds of afternoon shoppers and tourists who seemed oblivious to the chase happening around them. The suspect heading toward the palace, she gasped into her radio between breaths. Male, approximately 20 years old, wearing dark clothing, carrying a small black handbag. The chase had started in the busy shopping district near Parliament, but the suspect was now running toward one of the most heavily guarded areas in London. Sarah knew the protocols around Buckingham Palace were strict, but she couldn't let the thief escape just because he was heading toward royal property. Meanwhile, Guardsman James Crawford stood at his post outside the palace gates, maintaining the perfect stillness that had made the Queen's Guard famous worldwide. At 31, James had served in Afghanistan before joining the ceremonial unit. His military training had taught him to remain alert even while appearing motionless. He noticed the commotion approaching from several blocks away, raised voices, the sound of running feet, and the unmistakable urgency of a police pursuit. The suspect burst into view, running directly toward the palace gates with obvious panic. Behind him, Sarah appeared, her police identification badge visible. But her focus entirely on the fleeing criminal. She was gaining ground. But the thief had spotted what he thought might be sanctuary in the formal gardens, adjacent to the palace grounds. James watched the scene unfold with professional interest. Police chases near the palace weren't uncommon, but something about this particular pursuit felt different. The officer chasing the suspect was clearly exhausted, and the desperation in both their movements suggested this wasn't a routine matter. Sarah was less than 10 feet behind the suspect when he suddenly changed direction, veering toward the palace gates. In her exhaustion and single-minded focus on making the arrest, she didn't immediately notice the ceremonial guard standing perfectly still in his red uniform and tall black bearskin hat. The suspect stumbled as he tried to climb the ornate iron gates, giving Sarah the opportunity she had been waiting for. She lunged forward to tackle him, but her timing was slightly off due to her fatigue. Instead of catching the thief, her momentum carried her directly into Guardsman Crawford. The collision was spectacular. Sarah, weighing about 140 pounds and moving at full speed, hit the 6'2" guardsman with enough force to knock him completely off balance. His ceremonial rifle clattered to the ground as he stumbled backward, his famous composure shattered. For the first time in 5 years of service, but what happened next surprised everyone watching, including the growing crowd of tourists who had stopped to film the incident with their phones. Instead of anger or formal protest about protocol violations, James Crawford's first reaction was to steady Sarah, who had bounced off him and was about to fall backward onto the pavement. "Easy there," he said in a calm Scottish accent, catching her arm before she could hit the ground. "Are you hurt?" Sarah looked up at him in confusion, still processing what had just happened. She had just committed what could be considered an assault on one of the most protected ceremonial positions in Britain, and the guard was asking if she was hurt. I'm so sorry," she stammered, suddenly aware of the magnitude of her mistake. "I was chasing a suspect and I didn't see you and ... the lad in the hoodie," James asked, still holding her steady. "He's right there." Sarah turned to see that the thief, apparently stunned by the collision, had given up his escape attempt and was sitting on the ground looking dazed. The fall from the gate had knocked the wind out of him, and he was making no attempt to run. "I need to arrest him," Sarah said, her police training kicking back in despite her embarrassment. "Of course," James replied. "Let me help." What followed was perhaps the most unusual arrest in the history of London policing. A Queen's Guard, still in his full ceremonial uniform, but having abandoned all pretense of motionless dignity, helped a Metropolitan Police detective apprehend a purse snatcher right in front of Buckingham Palace while dozens of tourists filmed the entire incident. James retrieved his rifle and resumed a modified version of his post while Sarah handcuffed the suspect and read him his rights. But the formal distance that usually existed between the ceremonial guards and the regular police had been completely shattered by their collision. "Thank you," Sarah said, as backup officers arrived to take the suspect into custody. "I'm really sorry about running into you like that." James smiled, the first expression most of the watching tourists had ever seen on a guard's face. "Don't worry about it. These things happen, do they?" Sarah asked, still amazed by his calm reaction. "Well, no," James admitted. "This is definitely a first for me. But I've been tackled by bigger people in Afghanistan, so at least this time it was by someone on the same side." The crowd that had gathered to watch the incident began to disperse as the excitement died down. But many continued to stare at the guard who had broken character so completely and so gracefully. James straightened his uniform and prepared to resume his ceremonial duties, but Sarah lingered. "I should probably file a report about this," she said. "There will be paperwork, maybe an inquiry about protocol violations." "Probably," James agreed. "But you were doing your job, and so was I. Sometimes those jobs overlap in unexpected ways." As Sarah walked away with the arrested suspect, she couldn't stop thinking about the guard's reaction. In 20 years of police work, she had encountered every type of personality from helpful civilians to hostile officials, who cared more about procedure than justice. But she had never met anyone who had responded to being accidentally tackled with such immediate concern for her welfare. James returned to his post, but his usual perfect stillness was harder to maintain. The brief human connection he had shared with the detective had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten during his years of ceremonial duty, that beneath the uniform and the tradition, he was still just a person trying to do the right thing. Neither of them realized that their collision would soon lead to consequences far beyond a simple arrest and a broken protocol. The video footage of Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell tackling Guardsman James Crawford went viral within hours. By evening, the clip had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, with headlines ranging from police officer attacks Royal Guard to most polite tackle in history. Sarah sat in her supervisor's office the next morning watching the various news reports with a growing sense of dread. Chief Superintendent Robert Walsh clicked through different channels, each showing the same footage from multiple angles that tourists had captured on their phones. "Well, Mitchell," Chief Walsh said, turning off the television, "in 30 years of police work, I've never had to deal with a situation quite like this. You've managed to create an international incident while making an arrest." Sarah winced. "Sir, I was pursuing a suspect. I didn't intentionally target the guard. It was an accident caused by exhaustion and tunnel vision during the chase." "I know that, and anyone watching the full footage can see that," Chief Walsh replied. "But the Palace Protocol Office has requested a formal meeting. Apparently, physical contact with the Queen's Guard without authorization is taken very seriously." "What kind of meeting?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The kind where they decide whether to file formal charges or handle this as a disciplinary matter. Your career could be over, Sarah." Meanwhile, across London, at Wellington Barracks, James Crawford was facing his own interrogation. Colonel Michael Harrison, commanding officer of the regiment, had summoned James to his office first thing in the morning. "Guardsman Crawford," Colonel Harrison began, reviewing a thick file on his desk. "Explain to me how one of my most reliable soldiers ended up abandoning his post to help arrest a criminal." James stood at attention. "Sir, I was struck by the pursuing officer during her lawful attempt to apprehend a suspect. After ensuring she wasn't injured, I assisted with the arrest, as any citizen would be expected to do." "Any citizen, yes. But you're not any citizen. You're Queen's Guard. Your duty is to maintain your post and uphold the dignity of the position." "With respect, sir, my primary duty is to protect the royal family and the palace. A fleeing criminal in the immediate vicinity posed a potential security threat." Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying James carefully. It's an interesting interpretation of your duties, Crawford. Tell me, what did you think of the officer who ran into you? The question caught James off guard. Sir, Detective Inspector Mitchell, what was your impression of her? James considered his words carefully. She appeared to be a dedicated officer doing her job under difficult circumstances, but determined to apprehend the suspect. And after she knocked you down, she immediately apologized and showed genuine concern about protocol violations. She struck me as someone who takes her responsibilities seriously. Colonel Harrison made notes in James's file. The Palace Security Office has requested a full review of the incident. There's talk of disciplinary action, possibly even dismissal from the ceremonial unit. James felt his stomach drop. The Queen's Guard had been his life for 5 years, a source of pride after his military service in combat zones. The thought of losing his position because he had tried to help a police officer was devastating. However, Colonel Harrison continued, "There's been an interesting development. The palace has received over 10,000 messages in the past 24 hours. Would you like to guess what they say?" "I couldn't speculate, sir." Colonel Harrison opened his computer and began reading. Here's a typical one. "The guard who helped the police officer showed exactly the kind of character we want representing our royal family. His kindness and quick thinking made Britain proud." He scrolled down. And another, finally, a royal. "Guard who remembers he's a human being first and a symbol second." James remained silent, unsure how to respond. "It seems," Colonel Harrison continued, "that your breach of protocol has somehow enhanced the reputation of the Queen's Guard rather than damaging it. The public sees your actions as heroic rather than inappropriate." Back at the police station, Sarah was receiving similar news from Chief Walsh. "The complaint calls have been outnumbered by support messages about 50 to 1, he told her. "Apparently the public likes seeing police and the military working together instead of standing." On ceremony, "Does that mean I'm not in trouble?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Oh, you're still in trouble. But it's the kind of trouble that might actually help your career if we handle it right." That afternoon, both Sarah and James received identical messages, requesting their presence at a meeting at the palace the following day. The messages were brief and formal, giving no indication of what to expect. Sarah spent the evening researching palace protocol and trying to prepare for what she assumed would be a formal reprimand, or worse. She had worked too hard to build her career to lose it over one moment of exhaustion during a pursuit. James, meanwhile, polished his dress uniform and tried to accept that his time as a Queen's Guard might be coming to an end. He had no regrets about helping Sarah or assisting with the arrest, but he understood that tradition and protocol were more important than individual judgment in his role. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning in one of the palace's smaller conference rooms. Both Sarah and James arrived early, sitting in uncomfortable silence in the waiting area outside the room. "How are you feeling about all this?" Sarah finally asked. "Nervous," James admitted. "You terrified?" "I keep thinking about how I've probably destroyed both our careers with one tackle." "It wasn't really a tackle," James said with a slight smile. "More of an accidental collision. Tell that to the disciplinary board." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edward Phillips, the Lord Chamberlain, accompanied by Chief Superintendent Walsh and Colonel Harrison. "Detective Inspector Mitchell, Guardsman Crawford," Sir Edward said formally, "thank you for coming. Please, follow me." They were led into a room where several officials were seated around a polished wooden table. Sarah recognized some faces from television: senior palace administrators, military officials, and police supervisors. "Please sit down," Sir Edward said, gesturing 2 chairs at one end of the table. Sarah and James sat side by side, both expecting the worst, but trying to maintain professional composure. "We've called this meeting," Sir Edward began, "to address the incident that occurred yesterday outside the palace gates. Both of you have expressed concern about potential disciplinary action." Sarah and James nodded silently. "Before we discuss consequences," Sir Edward continued, "I'd like to share something with you. Her Majesty has been following this situation personally." The room fell completely silent. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that the Queen herself was aware of their collision. "Her Majesty's response," Sir Edward said, opening a formal document, "was quite unexpected. He paused dramatically before continuing. She said, and I quote, "Finally, someone has shown that duty and humanity can work together rather than in opposition to each other." Sarah and James exchanged glances, unsure what this meant for their futures. "The Queen," Sir Edward announced, "would like to meet with both of you personally to discuss your actions and their broader implications for how we balance tradition with practical service to the public." The words hit both of them like a thunderbolt. Instead of disciplinary action, they were being invited to meet with the monarch herself to discuss their accidental collaboration. The morning of their audience with Queen Elizabeth II arrived with unseasonable rain that seemed to match Sarah's nervous energy. She had spent the previous evening practicing her curtsy and reviewing proper forms of address, while James had pressed his dress uniform until it was perfect. They met in the palace's entrance hall, both looking more nervous than they had during any dangerous situation in their respective careers. The ornate surroundings made their upcoming meeting feel even more surreal. "I've been a police officer for 20 years, Sarah whispered as they waited, "and I've never been this scared." "I've served in combat zones," James replied quietly, "and this is definitely more terrifying than anything I faced in Afghanistan, sir." Edward Phillips appeared promptly at the appointed time, leading them through corridors lined with centuries of royal portraits. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floors as they passed rooms that most people would never see. "Her Majesty is looking forward to meeting you both," Sir Edward said as they walked. "She has a particular interest in stories that demonstrate public service under unusual circumstances." They were led to a small sitting room overlooking the palace gardens. The Queen was seated in a comfortable chair near the window, and she rose as they entered. Both Sarah and James bowed and curtsied as they had been instructed, their nervousness evident despite their attempts at formality. "Detective Inspector Mitchell, Guardsman Crawford," the Queen said warmly, "please sit down. I've been quite eager to hear your account of recent events." As they settled into chairs arranged in a small circle, Sarah was struck by how normal the Queen seemed, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. "Your Majesty," Sarah began carefully, "I want to apologize for the incident. I never intended to compromise the dignity of the Queen's Guard or violate any protocols." The Queen smiled slightly. "My dear, if I were concerned about dignity, I wouldn't have asked to meet with you. I'm far more interested in character than ceremony." She turned to James. "Guardsman Crawford, I understand you abandoned protocol to assist Detective Inspector Mitchell. Can you explain your thinking?" James straightened in his chair. "Your Majesty, I saw an officer in potential distress and a criminal in our immediate vicinity. It seemed that helping ensure both situations were resolved safely was more important than maintaining my ceremonial stance, even though it violated your standing orders." "Yes, Your Majesty. Sometimes doing the right thing requires making difficult choices about competing priorities." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "And Detective Inspector Mitchell, what did you think when Guardsman Crawford chose to help you rather than maintain his post?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "I was surprised, Your Majesty. My experience, people in formal positions usually prioritize protocol over practical assistance. His immediate concern for my welfare and willingness to help with the arrest showed remarkable character." "A character," the Queen repeated. "That's exactly the word I used when I first heard about this incident." She paused and looked out the window. At the gardens where tourists were gathering for the changing of the guard ceremony, the Queen continued, "there's been considerable debate about whether the monarchy and its traditions remain relevant in modern Britain. Critics argue that ceremonies and protocols are outdated relics that serve no practical purpose." Sarah and James remained silent, unsure how to respond to such a profound statement. "But what happened between you two suggests something different," the Queen said. "You demonstrated that tradition and practical service can work together rather than in opposition. Guardsman Crawford, your willingness to break protocol showed that the values underlying our tradition's duty, service, protection of others, are more important than the forms themselves." James felt a wave of relief mixed with pride. "Detective Inspector Mitchell," the Queen continued, "your immediate concern for protocol violations after making Lawful arrest showed respect for our institutions, even while doing your job under difficult circumstances. Thank you, Your Majesty, Sarah said, still processing the unexpected direction of the conversation. The Queen leaned forward slightly. I've asked you here because I believe your actions demonstrate something important about modern public service. Too often, we create artificial barriers between different types of duty. Police and military, civilian and ceremonial, tradition and innovation, these shouldn't be competing forces. She gestured toward the window where the guard ceremony was beginning. Those tourists gathering out there aren't just watching a historical reenactment. They're seeing symbols of service, duty, and dedication. But symbols only have meaning if they represent real values lived by real people. The Queen stood and walked to a small desk where she picked up two official-looking documents. I've been considering how to respond to your incident, she said, returning to her chair. Traditional disciplinary actions seemed inappropriate given the circumstances and public response. Sarah and James exchanged glances, still uncertain what this meant for their futures. Instead, the Queen announced, I'm creating a new initiative. The Royal Service Integration Program will study ways to improve cooperation between different branches of public service while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of each. She handed one document to each of them. Detective Inspector Mitchell, would you accept appointment as the Metropolitan Police liaison to this program? Sarah stared at the document, hardly believing what she was reading. Your Majesty, Yes. Of course, I would be honored. And Guardsman Crawford, would you serve as the military representative? Helping to develop protocols that preserve tradition while allowing for practical flexibility when circumstances require it? Throat tightened with emotion. Your Majesty, yes. Absolutely yes. The Queen smiled broadly. Excellent. Your first assignment will be to work together to create training scenarios that help different services understand each other's roles and responsibilities. We'll be working together? Sarah asked. Extensively. The program will require you to spend considerable time at each other's facilities, training with different units, and developing new approaches to inter-service cooperation. The magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. Instead of ending their careers, their accidental collision was launching them into entirely new roles that would reshape how different branches of public service worked together. I have one. Final question, the Queen said. Do you think your collision yesterday was truly accidental? Sarah and James looked at each other, both remembering the split-second decisions that had led to their encounter. I was completely focused on the suspect, Sarah said honestly. I didn't see the guard until I hit him. I was maintaining my post, James added. I had no way to avoid the collision, the Queen nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps sometimes the most important encounters in our lives happen because we're both exactly where we're supposed to be, doing exactly what we're supposed to do, even when it doesn't seem planned. As their audience concluded, Sarah and James walked back through the palace corridors with their new appointments in hand, still processing the dramatic turn their lives had taken. So we're going to be working together, Sarah said as they reached the entrance hall. Looks that way, James replied. Think we can manage it without any more tackle situations? Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had since the incident. Occurred. I make no promises. I think this is going to be interesting. Neither of them realized just how interesting their collaboration would become, or how their accidental partnership would eventually transform the way Britain's public services worked together. 6 months into the Royal Service Integration Program, Sarah Mitchell stood in a military training facility watching James Crawford instruct a group of police officers in precision movement and crowd control techniques. Both their careers had been remarkable, but what surprised her most was how naturally they had begun working together. The key, James was explaining to the officers, is maintaining awareness of everyone around you while focusing on your primary objective. In ceremonial duty, we call it active stillness, being completely alert while appearing completely calm. Detective Sergeant Mark Thompson raised his hand. That's all well and good for standing guard, but what about when we're chasing suspects? Through crowds? James smiled, an expression that had become much more common since his collaboration with Sarah began. Actually, the principles are the same. Sarah, would you demonstrate? Sarah stepped forward, still amazed by how comfortable she had become in these training scenarios. Last week, we tested this approach during a pursuit exercise. Instead of tunnel vision focused only on the suspect, I maintained awareness of pedestrians, traffic, and potential obstacles while keeping the target in sight. She gestured to a training course set up with mannequins representing civilians. The result was a safer pursuit, with better coordination with backup units. The exercise that followed was unlike anything either the police or military had done before. Officers and guards worked in mixed teams, with each group learning from the other's expertise. Police officers gained discipline and situational awareness from military training, while guards learned dynamic response and civilian interaction from police methods. After the session, Sarah and James reviewed their notes in the small office they now shared at the program headquarters. The feedback scores keep improving, Sarah noted, looking at evaluation forms from participants. Average cooperation ratings are up 30% from our first month. More importantly, James added, we're seeing real results in the field. That joint operation last month at the embassy security alert went smoother than anyone expected. Their success hadn't gone unnoticed. The program had expanded from a small experimental initiative to a model being studied by other countries. Delegations from France, Germany, even the United States had visited to observe their training methods. Dr. Catherine Wells, behavioral psychologist who had been assigned to evaluate the program, knocked on their office door. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but I wanted to share some interesting findings from our latest assessment. She sat down and opened a thick folder of research data. We've been analyzing the psychological profiles of participants before and after training. The results are remarkable. Sarah and James leaned forward with interest. Both police officers and military personnel show significant improvements in stress management, decision-making under pressure, and most surprisingly, job satisfaction ratings. Why is that surprising? James asked. Asking people to change established patterns of behavior and adopt techniques from unfamiliar disciplines? Usually that creates resistance and decreased satisfaction. But your participants are reporting higher levels of engagement and purpose. Dr. Wells flipped through several charts. The qualitative feedback suggests that learning from each other has given people a broader perspective on their own roles. Police officers report feeling more dignified and purposeful, while military personnel report feeling more connected to civilian life and practical service. Sarah considered this. It makes sense. Before the program, I sometimes felt like police work was just responding to one crisis after another. Learning military discipline and ceremony has given me a sense of serving something larger than individual cases, and I spent years standing perfectly still representing tradition without feeling connected to modern life, James added. Working with police has shown me how our values translate into practical service. Dr. Wells nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what we're seeing across all participants. The program is creating what we call integrated professional identity, people who see their specific roles as part of a larger system of public service. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. She glanced at the caller. Eden frowned. It's my old superintendent, she told James. Excuse me for a moment. She stepped outside to take the call, returning a few minutes later with an expression of concern. Problem? James asked. Potentially? There's been a serious incident at Westminster Bridge. Multiple armed suspects, hostages, and it's right in the heart of tourist and government areas. Dr. Wells looked confused. But you're both assigned to the training program now. Why would they call you about an active incident? Sarah and James exchanged glances. Over the months of working together, they had developed an almost telepathic communication style. Because, James said slowly, this is exactly the kind of situation our program was designed to address. Multiple agencies, civilian and military. Concerns, protocol, and practical response all mixed together. Sarah was already reaching for her jacket. They want us to coordinate the inter-service response. Police, military, palace security, and emergency services, all working the same incident. This is it, James realized. Our first real test. They arrived at the incident command center to find controlled chaos. Police vehicles, military transport, ambulances, and fire services had converged on the area around Westminster Bridge. The suspects had taken hostages in a tour boat on the Thames, creating a complex situation that crossed multiple jurisdictions, required various types of expertise. Commander Patricia Hughes, the senior police officer on scene, briefed them quickly. 4 armed suspects, approximately 20 hostages, most of them foreign tourists. The boat is anchored in the middle of the river, making approach difficult. We need coordination between river police, tactical teams, military support, and diplomatic protocols because of the international hostages. Sarah surveyed the scene, her new training helping her see patterns and connections she might have missed before. What about evacuation of the surrounding area? That's where it gets complicated. Commander Hughes replied. We need to clear Westminster Bridge and the South Bank, but the palace security team is concerned about maintaining normal operations for scheduled events. James stepped forward. I can coordinate with palace security. We've developed protocols for maintaining ceremonial functions while accommodating emergency operations. And I can work with the tactical teams and river police, Sarah added. We've been training mixed units for exactly this type of multi-agency response. What followed was the most complex operation either had ever been involved in. Sarah found herself coordinating between police units using communication techniques she had learned from military operations, while James worked with civilian agencies using the flexible response methods he had learned from police training. The breakthrough came when James suggested using ceremonial boats from the palace fleet to approach the hostage vessel. The ornate royal barges would appear less threatening than police launches while carrying specially trained officers. The suspects will see them as tourist attractions rather than tactical assets, he explained to the tactical commander. Gives us the element of surprise while keeping hostages safer. Sarah coordinated the timing with precision that amazed the veteran officers around her. River police deploy at exactly 15:30. Ceremonial barges begin approach at 15:32. Tactical teams moved to secondary positions at 15:35. The operation unfolded with clockwork precision. The suspects focused on obvious police presence on the bridges, and riverbanks paid little attention to what appeared to be ceremonial boats conducting routine river activities. When the tactical teams made their move, they did so with the coordination and timing that had become the hallmark of the integration program. Within 12 minutes, all hostages were safe and all suspects were in custody. As the scene wound down and hostages were reunited with families, Commander Hughes approached Sarah and James. I've been a police officer for 25 years, she said, and I've never seen an operation run that smoothly. The coordination between agencies was flawless. That's what the program is designed to achieve, Sarah replied. When people understand each other's capabilities and methods, they can work together instead of just alongside each other. James nodded toward the ceremonial barges being secured by their crews. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined using palace boats in a police operation, and Sarah would never have thought to coordinate a tactical response using ceremonial timing. But together, Sarah concluded, we found a solution that neither of our agencies could have developed alone. As they drove back to program headquarters that evening, both realized that their accidental collision had led to something far more significant than either had imagined. They weren't just training people to work together, they were creating new ways of thinking about public service itself. 1 year after the Westminster Bridge incident, Sarah Mitchell stood before an international conference of law enforcement and military officials in Geneva, Switzerland. The Royal Service Integration Program had become a model studied worldwide, and she had been invited to present their findings to representatives from over 40 countries. The traditional approach to public service, Sarah began her presentation, assumes that different agencies should maintain clear boundaries and distinct methods. Our experience suggests that this creates unnecessary barriers to effective cooperation. In the audience, James Crawford watched with pride as his partner delivered their research findings to the distinguished international gathering. Their friendship had evolved into one of the most effective professional partnerships either had ever experienced. The key breakthrough, Sarah continued, came from recognizing that ceremony and action, tradition and innovation, military discipline and civilian flexibility are not opposing forces. They are complementary strengths that become more powerful when combined. The presentation included video footage from their training programs, showing police officers learning precision and protocol from guards, while military personnel learned community interaction and adaptive response from civilian officers. Dr. Antonio Rossi from the Italian Carabinieri raised his hand. Ms. Mitchell, your results are impressive, but how do you address concerns about diluting the unique expertise of each service? James stood to answer. That's actually been one of our most important discoveries. Rather than diluting expertise, cross-training enhances it. Police officers don't become less effective at investigation, they become more effective because they approach it with greater discipline and situational awareness. And guards don't lose their ceremonial precision, Sarah added. They gain the ability to maintain that precision while remaining connected to the practical purposes their ceremony represents. After the presentation, they were approached by delegation after delegation, wanting to implement similar programs in their own countries. The Canadian Mounted Police were particularly interested in applying their methods to tourist area security. The French Republican Guard wanted to explore how ceremonial units could better support civilian law enforcement. But the conversation that meant the most came from Colonel Maria Santos of the Spanish Civil Guard. What you've created, she told them over coffee after the conference, goes beyond operational effectiveness. You've shown that public service can be both dignified and practical, both traditional and responsive. That wasn't our original goal, Sarah admitted. We were just trying to fix a problem that started with me accidentally tackling James. Colonel Santos laughed. Sometimes the best solutions come from accidents that force us to see familiar things in new ways. Their success had led to opportunities neither had expected. James had been promoted to major and was being considered for a position, developing ceremonial protocols for international diplomatic events. Sarah had been offered a superintendent position with responsibility for insurgency coordination across London, but their greatest satisfaction came from seeing how their program had changed the lives of individual participants. Detective Constable Emma Richards had been struggling with stress and job dissatisfaction before joining one of their training courses. The military discipline and ceremonial elements had given her a sense of purpose and pride that transformed her approach to police work. I used to feel like I was just putting out fires, she told Sarah during a follow-up interview. Learning from the guards helped me understand that every interaction with the public is a chance to represent something larger than myself. Similarly, Guardsman Robert Lee had been considering leaving the military before participating in the program. Working with police officers had shown him how his skills could be applied to direct community service. Standing guard always felt static, he explained to James. I understand that what we represent, duty, service, protection, can be expressed through action as well as ceremony. The program's success had also attracted academic attention. Professor David Thompson from Oxford University had begun a longitudinal study of participants, tracking how cross-training affected career satisfaction and performance over time. Your model challenges fundamental assumptions about professional identity, he told Sarah and James during one of his research visits. Traditional theory suggests that 3 years after their accidental collision, Sarah Mitchell and James Crawford found themselves facing the greatest challenge of their partnership. A terrorist attack at London Bridge had resulted in multiple casualties and had exposed critical gaps in intelligence communication that their program was supposed to have solved. Sarah sat in the emergency debriefing room at New Scotland Yard, reviewing the timeline of events with a growing sense of failure. Despite years of training and protocol development, the response had been chaotic, with different agencies working at cross purposes during the critical first hour. The breakdown wasn't an individual training, explained Commander Hughes, who was leading the investigation. Our officers and military personnel performed well individually. The problem was systemic coordination failure at the command level. James, who had been coordinating military support during the incident, nodded grimly. We trained people to work together in small units, but we never adequately addressed how to coordinate multiple large-scale operations simultaneously. The attack had involved coordinated strikes at 3 different locations, overwhelming the integrated command structure they had developed. While their trained personnel had performed admirably in face-to-face cooperation, the broader organizational response had fragmented under pressure. "The media is already calling it a failure of the integration program," Sarah said, reading from her tablet. "There are demands for a return to traditional separate agency responses." Dr. Wells, who had been monitoring the psychological impact on program participants, joined their discussion with concerning news. "We're seeing significant stress reactions among personnel who participated in the response," she reported. "Many are questioning whether their cross-training was adequate. Some are experiencing what appears to be professional identity crisis." The criticism hit particularly hard because the program had been held up as a model for international cooperation. Delegations that had been planning to implement similar systems were now reconsidering, and funding for expansion was being questioned. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe trying to integrate different services was naive. Maybe there's a reason these boundaries existed in the first place. James looked at his partner with concern. In 3 years of working together, he had never seen her lose confidence so completely. "The easy thing would be to give up," he said quietly. "Go back to our original roles and pretend this never happened. Learned are the people who've been helped by the program. But what if we're making things worse? What if our integration approach actually creates more problems than it solves?" Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Detective Constable Emma Richards, one of their early program participants, knocked on the office door. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I needed to talk to you both." Emma had been one of the first responders at London Bridge, and Sarah expected her to express doubts about her training or concerns about the program's effectiveness. Instead, Emma said something that completely surprised them. "I wanted to thank you for the integration training. It saved lives during the attack." Sarah and James looked at her with confusion. "But the response was chaotic," Sarah protested. "The coordination broke down completely." Emma shook her head. "The overall coordination had problems, yes. But at the ground level, the integration training made all the difference. When I arrived at the scene, there were military personnel, emergency medical services, fire brigade, and police all trying to help, but nobody was communicating effectively." Gosh. She sat down and pulled out her notebook, showing them her incident report. "Guys, of the program, I could speak the language of each service. I understood military tactical thinking, so I could coordinate with the soldiers securing the perimeter. I understood emergency medical protocols, so I could help prioritize casualty treatment. Most importantly, I could translate between services." When their standard communication methods failed, James leaned forward with interest. "What do you mean, translate?" Military personnel were using tactical terminology that confused the paramedics. Paramedics were using medical codes that the police didn't understand. Fire services had their own communication system that nobody else could follow. But because I had trained with all of them, I could interpret and coordinate. Tablin showed them video footage from the incident. Watch this section at timestamp 14:23. The video showed Emma moving between different groups of responders, clearly facilitating communication and coordination that allowed them to work together effectively despite the broader system breakdown. "I wasn't the only one," Emma continued. "Every program participant I saw was doing the same thing, serving as bridges between services when the formal coordination systems failed." Over the following days, similar reports came in from other incident sites. Program participants had consistently performed better during the crisis, not because they had prevented system failures, but because they had been able to work around those failures when they occurred. Dr. Thompson from Oxford University arrived to conduct interviews with participants and analyze their performance data. "This is remarkable," he told Sarah and James after reviewing the evidence. "Your program didn't prevent the coordination breakdown. No training program could have done that. But it created a network of individuals who could maintain effective cooperation even when formal systems failed. The realization changed everything about how they understood their work. The program's value wasn't in preventing all coordination problems, but in creating resilient networks of people who could adapt and cooperate under any circumstances." Armed with this new understanding, Sarah and James requested a meeting with senior officials from all the agencies involved in the London Bridge response. "We've been thinking about integration wrong," Sarah told the assembled commanders and directors. "We treated it as a way to prevent coordination failures, but its real value is in creating adaptive capacity when failures inevitably occur." James presented their analysis of participant performance during the crisis. People trained in multiple service methods don't just follow protocols better. They can create new protocols in real time when existing ones break down. The meeting resulted in a complete reimagining of the program. Instead of focusing on preventing interagency problems, they would focus on building adaptive capacity throughout the public service system. The new approach, dubbed resilient integration, emphasized flexibility, communication skills, and the ability to work effectively outside formal command structures when necessary. 6 months later, Sarah and James were once again presenting to an international audience, but this time their message was different. "We learned that perfect coordination is impossible in complex emergencies," Sarah told the assembled officials. "But adaptive cooperation is achievable if people understand each other's capabilities and can communicate across professional boundaries." The London Bridge incident, initially seen as a failure of their program, had become its greatest validation. Countries that had postponed implementation were now eager to adopt the resilient integration model. More importantly, the program participants, who had doubted themselves after the incident, had regained confidence in their training. They understood that their role wasn't to prevent all problems, but to solve problems that couldn't be prevented. On the 5th anniversary of their original collision, Sarah and James stood once again outside Buckingham Palace, watching tourists gather to see the changing of the guard. The ceremony continued unchanged, but the guards performing it now carried with them a broader understanding of their role in public service. "Do you think we've succeeded?" Sarah asked, watching a group of their program graduates among the guards. James considered the question carefully. "We've created something that didn't exist before, a way for people in public service to see beyond their individual roles to the larger purpose they all serve." And what's that purpose? Taking care of people, whether you're a police officer or a guard, a paramedic or a firefighter. We're all in the business of making life safer and better for everyone else. A young tourist nearby was trying to get one of the guards to react, waving and making faces just as people had done on the day Sarah and James first met. The guard maintained his ceremonial composure, but there was something in his bearing that suggested awareness and connection rather than mere ritual. "You know what I think our real achievement is?" Sarah said. "What's that?" "We proved that people are more important than procedures, that flexibility and tradition can work together, that accidents can become opportunities if you're willing to learn from them." James smiled, the same warm expression that had surprised everyone who witnessed their original encounter. "Not bad for a collision that started with someone not watching where they were going." Sarah laughed. "Best accident I ever had." As they walked away from the palace, their partnership had evolved into something neither had expected, a friendship that had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of thousands of people around the world who served the public in various ways. Their accidental collision had become a deliberate choice to work together, and that choice had rippled outward in ways they were still